All right. No, thank you everybody for coming along today. Digital radio, obviously radio is something close to our heart at Radio Parts. It is how we began in the 1930s when the only entertainment was radios. Fortunately, it's an area that actually has maintained its relevance for our business because it seems like everything is radio these days, from obviously radio to TV to two-way. Every aspect of our business seems to involve some form of radio communication. So understanding the radio communication and how digital radio is different to standard radio is very important in diagnosing problems and understanding why it's a good alternative. Today I've got Ben presenting. Ben's been a busy boy this year, doing lots of presentations, and you've probably got a few other things on your mind at the moment. But without further ado, I'm sure you'll do a great job. I'll pass it across to Ben.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Yes, I'm got two more presentations to go through over the next few weeks as well, so hopefully I can see more of you here for those. But thank you very much for coming along this morning. I appreciate the people who've been before and all of you forced to be here by obligation or chains, whatever it takes, so thank you very much. This morning, our general purpose topic is digital radio. So we're talking DAB radio, digital audio broadcasting. And in Australia, we use DAB Plus is our general standard. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail and some of the differences between that and DAB in general. This I'm hoping to be a shorter one than one of my normal epic training sessions. So a few bits and pieces, but obviously ask any questions you have. Anything that's come up in particular jobs or unusual scenarios for you, let me know and we'll try and cover those and look at them as we go through as well. Our general purpose today is to tell you what DAB Plus is, the current state of DAB Plus in Australia and around the world, coverage, what's happening now and what's happening potentially in the next 5 years here in Australia, antennas and reception tips for it all, which is probably one of the biggest areas for us to cover in terms of the products themselves. You know, you've sold radios before, you know what they are and how they work, but how do you get digital radio reception in area X? Or what happens if you're behind a building? Or I live 500 kilometres from Melbourne, can I get digital radio? Those sort of things. And the last one will be choosing the right digital radio, part of the combination of the antenna topic before it. I'm also endeavouring today to try and avoid using the word DAB as much as possible because that has other connotations in, let's say, youth culture, making me very, very old when I say that, but I'll try and avoid it all the way through. Okay, so let's start with a general thing of what is digital audio broadcasting. So why do we use it in the first place and why are we trying to move all of our radios across to it? For those of you who have been in the industry long enough, you'll know about the digital TV transition. When we had analog TV stations throughout Australia, then the government said, well, that's good, but we can do more with digital. And the TV studios said, oh, we can do a lot more and we can advertise a lot more and we can put more channels in there. So great, let's do it and let's enjoy it and let's sell lots of stuff. So we sold lots of set-top boxes and new antennas and masthead amplifiers and new cabling, splitters, everything else to make sure that digital TV reception worked perfectly. And now instead of the 6 to 7 channels that most of us had pre-digital switchover, I think the current number in Melbourne is something like 51 or 53, something ridiculous like that. So everything from SBS movie channels to radio stations transmitted over digital TV, through to ABC for Kids, ABC 24 News, ABC this, ABC that. So it's a really great way of getting more content. And if all you want to do is watch your cooking and food all day, you've now got an option for it. Whereas before, you might occasionally have to have a break for a talk show or for soap opera or some other sort of news program. So with digital radio, the same sort of thing is true. We use up a fair amount of spectrum, let's just say in the FM space, 88 megahertz all the way up to 108 megahertz. We need to be channel separation, so you can't have a channel stacked right alongside each other. This is why we have 101.9 and 101 and not much in between the two. There needs to be a certain amount of break there and they have this slope off effect at the edges, so it's kind of hard to jam them all in there nice and tight. And if you're a station owner, you've bought the rights to one frequency. If you're rich enough, you might have bought a couple of others that you buy sister channels or sub channels or something else like that for it. But you're very limited in what you can do. You're also only really broadcasting audio. Say in the FM space, it's an FM signal. That's all you're broadcasting all day, every day. If you want to give a bit of information or news or alternative commentary for the football or something else like that, you've got no choice. You've got no way of being able to do that via a traditional analog broadcast. With digital, all of that is definitely possible. In theory, digital is better. I'll talk a little bit more about the practice of it, but the idea of being digital is that I can jam multiple stations in on a single frequency or on a single band. So in one of our 7 megahertz, digital TV channels, if I put that for digital, I can put 30 odd stations within that, depending on the quality levels and everything else I want to do. So that's a huge improvement for somebody. I put one station, one little bit of the radio spectrum up there, and now I've got 40 odd stations in that one little section. That's really cool. And each of those stations, like let's say on the ABC, I could have not just ABC News, but I could have ABC Radio National. I could have local radio for ABC. I could have ABC Kids radio station playing nothing but children's tunes all day, every day in a very disturbing fashion. I can put community radio stations in there as well, and all these sort of things in that one band or that one spectrum. That's a really cool way of allocating space, and it means in true government fashion and the rest, we can use and sell off the rest of that space eventually to whatever we want it to be. That could be more mobile phone channels, could be more internet data, could be the new version of the NBN that's truly penetrating, Australia-wide on the 106 megahertz band, who knows? There are a lot of options for it, but we have to switch off our analog system to get there. And that means everybody's got to have digital. Very efficient use of spectrum. You've got a single channel list for it. So on something like this, I've tuned this radio in to digital radio. In fact, I didn't even need to do it. I just turned it on and switched to digital radio. This is picking up one of 2 frequencies here in Melbourne. If I want to go through the stations, all I've got to do is dial up and down them. And it's quick, it's almost instantaneous. I pick and choose a station, and there it is. Now I'm listening to that station. I don't have to scan from 101 to 109, from 109 to 102.7, from 102.7 to 103.5 or whatever else. And I don't have to remember what those stations are. I don't have to pre-program them to favorites, although I can still do it. So I've got a much, much simpler way of doing it. I have this nice long list of things that we're used to seeing, and that makes it very, very useful. We've got less analog noise. This can be a big one, particularly in city areas. Things like trams. Trams, as they electrically arc through a junction, that arc produces RF noise. And if you're listening to AM radio in particular, anywhere near a tram line, you'll hear all kinds of artifacts, all kinds of noise on the signal itself. And digital can get rid of all of those, which makes a very big difference. As it drops out, though, you have the same sort of thing that you did between digital TV and analog TV. Analog just went on and on and on forever, but it just sort of got more grainy, more noise, more words disappearing. Static, exactly. Got more static on it. The image looked cloudier. It might double image, all sorts of other stuff the further away you went. With digital, after a certain point, it just drops off and says, "No, you can't have this anymore." So very simple, but people know then that, I've gone out of digital range, or I've gone into an underground car park, or I've gone into the Melbourne tunnels and now I don't have digital radio anymore, or very little of it. Better quality-ish, I will get back to. So in theory, if you put an FM signal out there, the stereo signal, it works fine. AM signal, mono, it's okay, it's all right. But with this, I can create a much higher bandwidth signal, much higher kilobits per second, much more efficient way of using that space, so I get something that's closer to what the original recording sounded like. However, in practice, if you're a radio station and you've bought a certain amount of space on one of these new multiplexes of digital radio, you can choose whatever standard you want for each of your sub-channels. And if you want 15 sub-channels, well, you're probably going to have to compress them all down quite a lot to be able to fit them all in. For voice and for chatter and commentary and things like that, no problem at all. If you're a classical music listener, then that's when it starts to fall over and starts having some issues. More stations, the DAB ensemble stuff, and more information, more stuff on top of the signal. And by stuff, I mean album art, channel information, news and information, alerts can come up on the channel, traffic information can also come up on your digital radio to tell you exactly what's going on all the time. There's a thing called a dynamic label segment, which is basically a bit of information that the radio stations can chuck alongside the signal, and then it comes up on your radio to show you what's going on. It's a little bit hard to see on here, but in essence, there's our radio station. Now we're playing Talk Talk by Talk Talk. So I've got the track information's coming up. It might say, next up on Gold 104.3 is ABBA, or whatever else it is that's happening. And you can make the choice to switch away or not, as you like or not.
Actually, Ben, had the footy scores come up?
Yeah, as Joe said, sometimes the footy scores might come up on the radio, which if you're actually listening to the footy is probably okay. If you're not... If you weren't listening to the footy and you were just getting spoiled by the footy scores by another channel, that could be a bit of an issue as well. But yeah.
Have you been watching the road? Yes.
Joe, as always, as one of our senior reps, is always watching the road and never has any problems that way. So, okay, moving on just a little bit. DAB versus DAB+. So, for a little while there, DAB+ was used in very limited number of countries around the world, and Australia being one of them in the early days. But DAB itself was the first one that came out. Developed back in 1995, so a hell of a long time ago, by the Norwegian national radio, NRK, I think it is, and Sweden was very much online soon after that, and the BBC had a DAB radio station back in the day as well. In those days, what they did was they used what's called MP2, MPEG-1 audio layer 2 compression. Because they need to create something in a digital space, you need to take a good old analog my voice signal and chop it up into little pieces, recreate it, compress it into a digital signal of ones and zeros, and then at the other end, pull that ones and zeros and create stereo audio or my droning voice, whatever it is at the other end. So MP2 was what they used at the time. It was about the best that they had, and it was efficient enough for what they needed to do. The Beijing Olympics 2008 was China's first real digital audio broadcast, and they broadcast multiple channels throughout the 2008 Olympics. It was not forward compatible with DAB+ when the next one came out. So if you'd bought a DAB radio and then your country turned over to DAB+, you're out of luck. The opposite is not true, in that a DAB+ radio in general can pick up a DAB signal and still use it. So if you took one of these radios from Australia into a country where DAB was still the standard, in theory you could still pick up all the channels that were there, but you might get a little bit less information, the sound quality might be different and all that sort of stuff for it. And Canada trialled the digital broadcasting, but it actually dropped it. And the US is the biggest standout on the list of countries that do these, that doesn't provide a digital radio station using DAB+ or DAB or something similar. They use, well, a lot of theirs is still satellite radio, so Sirius XM and there's a couple of others that are over there. They still use digital compression, they still use digital, but they use a satellite radio service to bring it down instead. And they also use this thing called in-band on-channel, IBOC. It's kind of like if you've got a FM frequency, say 101.9, you can inject a digital signal along with your normal FM broadcast, and if you've got the right type of radio, you can pull that digital information back out again afterwards. But it's obviously a lot more limited because you don't have all the space to work with on a normal FM band. You've already kind of jammed that full of signal anyway. But in the US, it's a pretty effective way for them to get these things working. And Canada seems to be going the same way. DAB+ though, 2007, so obviously 20 years worth of development. There are a lot of changes that they made to make it happen, and that's not 20 years, that would be 12 years. Sorry, Friday brain. It is backwards compatible, as I said, and they used a new version of a compression method called MPEG-4 HEAAC V2, which I will cover in a minute in a little bit more detail, but not to the level of my research into it, where I went down the rabbit hole. It's a much more efficient system because of its efficiency. It uses less power to broadcast, it's more spectrum efficient, so you can fit more stations in the same amount of space, and potentially better sounding, along with some serious error correction in it, which makes it much better overall broadcast thing, particularly in weaker areas and so on for it. There is a thing that basically happens where you get to the edge of your digital range, and that cliff effect that we were talking about before, where you have reception one side and you have no reception on the other side. With these two, the old version of DAB, what would happen when you got to the end of your reception range, or where you were right at the edges of it, is you would get a lot of digital artifacts, a lot of digital noise. So those are the pops and crackles and weird whistles and things like that that can come through on a digital signal when you're not expecting it. DAB Plus opted for a sharper fall off and zero. No noise, no nothing, like patches of silence rather than pops and weird hisses and crackles and stuff like that. In general, people prefer it that way. You know, I'd rather have my radio drop out for a second than I'd have it squealing at me or doing something else silly. So that was the reason, part of the reason why they did it. And the error correction is a big thing in one particular case, and it causes us a fairly major issue that I'll talk about a little bit later in regards to live sport. And it's used throughout Europe, Middle East, South Korea, and other isolated countries, including Australia. All right. So MPEG-4 HEAAC V2. So I'm going to give you the very, very, very quick version of this. This is how they do digital radio. This is how they take the signal, compress it, and use it. HEAAC V2 means High Efficiency Advanced Audio Codec version 2, obviously. So the advanced audio codec and the profile is a way of splitting up the signal. You can choose to use a 40 kilobit sort of compression with these is equivalent to an 128 kilobit MP2 signal. So if you equate it with an MP3, roughly, you can use a third of the amount of data to transmit the same quality of signal. So there's a lot of stations, there's a lot of other services that use AAC V2 to do it. Something like Google Play, Netflix's audio is transmitted this way, and there's a whole heap of other ones. Those satellite broadcast services use this sort of thing to actually encode the audio as well. Better for geographical coverage because of the way the error correction works and the fact you use less data to do it, so you need less bits there to actually make the radio work. And yeah, the audible artifacts and things where we were talking about before. I don't want to go into too much detail on how this particularly works. In a general sense, you can choose which level of coding you want depending on the amount of compression you want and the type of performance you want out of it. So if you use all parts of this V2 profile, then you can compress a channel down to a really small amount and it makes it very bandwidth efficient, okay? So for things like speech, particularly, talkback radios, commentaries and things like that one, it's really, really channel efficient. It works really well and you get a result that sounds pretty much like the original did. For things like live music or audio, like better music recordings, you might not want to use all of that to do it because it will lose some of the data and lose some of the quality of the signal to make that happen. In a subjective test, they tried out different generations of this advanced audio codec, and you can see on the left there's a perceptual quality, in other words, how people perceived the sound quality of it. So at 128 kilobits per second, all the versions of it were about the same. And in fact, if you look at an MP2, you can see the same sort of thing here. They all have about the same level of quality at that same sort of bit rate. As the bit rate drops down, so we're trying to stick more channels in there, AAC drops off, so where it's at 48, it's noticeably worse than the 128 signal was. With AAC plus V2, I can drop it all the way down to 16, and I'm still getting into an acceptable level of quality. So for a talkback radio show, I don't need it to sound as high fidelity as a classical music station, so I can compress the hell out of that. It gives me more space to run more stations, sell more advertising and do all the things that makes a radio station money. So very, very useful thing to do. Okay, so current state of DAB Plus is empty. No, that's not quite true. I've got a couple of little things to show you. So I'll start with our local stuff and I'll move on to the worldwide one instead. So this is put out by the Digital Radio Plus for the Commercial Radio Association. This one is from Q2 2019, came out I think about July or August this year. So this is pretty accurate or pretty close to what we're up to now. Now we've got permanent stations in Hobart, Canberra and Darwin. So you've got rebroadcasts of local stations and you've got additional stations on top of those. I'll show you a little bit about that in a bit too. And you can see, I think this is probably an interesting way to think about it. Back in 2014, we had about 1.7. We've added 1 million more digital radio devices. That's excluding vehicle sales for it. So we've added about 1 million radios in that time, and we've sold a fair few, so thank you very much. The DAB Plus enabled devices in total is about 5.2 million. So this is including cars and other kinds of other kinds of locations. In the little text at the bottom here is something I want you to look at here. Regional rollout in the next 5 years. Albury, Bathurst, Bundaberg, Cairns, Cooma, Dubbo, Gold Coast, Goulburn, Newcastle, Lithgow, Mandurah, Murwillumbah, Sale, Sunshine Coast and Warragul. That's a lot of extra areas that are going to end up with digital radio stations over the next few years. Some of these are quite large centres, so places like the Gold Coast, for example. Albury region is quite a large one as well in terms of population, but look at Sale and Warragul, for example. They're quite small population centres themselves, but they cover a very distinct geographical region. So they'll add those stations in so more people will be able to access digital radio than before. I find that quite interesting. It means the market's going to jump as well over the next few years for it. But a lot of these cases, you may be further away from the transmitter, so you need to know more about reception and how to get your signal where you need it to be. DAB Plus weekly reach is about 30%, which is going up. And the top commercial DAB Plus only stations. Coles Radio, number 1. Anybody guess why that might be one of the number 1 ones that's out there? Yeah, a little bit of that, yeah. There are a fair number of Coles stores around Australia and associated Coles branded stores that also play their content, but let's say that that's there. Obviously the 90s tells a little bit about the demographic, as does the 80s. Old school hits and Triple M's classic rock station. Triple M's classic rock, I think, is transmitted on every single digital radio transmitter around Australia. So that's another one of the reasons why it has such penetration. You know, tradies from, Brisbane to Hobart and to Perth and in between on job sites, Triple M classic rock is a pretty safe bet for a good trade radio. Hence things like the little Sangians, the trade radios themselves. There is a little bit more to look at. So you can look at the total number of listeners is obviously going up and up over the years, but this is probably the biggest jump you can see here. So 2014, 153,000 vehicles were sold with a DAB radio, and I guarantee most of them were European. Now, 2019, it's nearly 2.6 million vehicles have been sold that have a digital radio in it. My work car has one in it. Mike's new car, I think, has a DAB Plus radio. Yeah, the old one's got one as well. Any of you have digital radios in your cars at the moment that you know about? Mark does, Liam, Chris, no? A few others? Okay, so it will become more and more the standard. There were Commodores of the last generation that had them. There are all sorts of other brands, and I'll show you a bit about that in a second too. And it's 73% of all new vehicles sold have a digital radio receiver built into it. That was end of June, so it's pretty recent. 20 brands had them in 2015. Now we're up to 51 brands. That's a lot of brands for Australia. And if I swap you back over to this is what we're looking at now. So in your new Ferrari, there might be a DAB Plus. In your Mahindra Ute, there might be a DAB Plus. Western Star, Volvo trucks, Rolls-Royce, Scania trucks, Isuzus, Peugeots. I mean, there aren't many on that list that are probably brands that you don't know, or chances are you might be buying one of these as your next car. For anybody buying a McLaren, I call dibs on second drive, but apparently they've got DAB Plus in them in Australia here too. So quite a list, quite a useful thing. All right, so I've shown you all of those. What I do want to show you now is a bit on world DAB. All right, so that is horrible. Let's try that again. Okay, so this is put out by the World DAB Alliance. So this is DAB and DAB+. What I want you to look at here is, the first thing on the list is digital switchover completed for all national radio December 2017. So for nationwide audio in Norway, so broadcasters that cover the entire country, they are all digital radio only broadcasters now. Switzerland is planned, I believe, for the entire radio spectrum. So every single radio station, from community to government to everything else, to commercial radios, will all be digital by the end of 2024. Yeah, so 5 years' time. United Kingdom, they're going to do a review of digital radio in the middle of everything else they're doing. Goodness knows how long that's going to take, etc., etc., etc. Australia, DAB Plus in 6 metropolitan and 1 regional areas with 65% population coverage, which I think is quite useful. You can see the figures that they've been giving out for, that we were talking about before. You can see the car figures, but I want you to look at the comparison here between the UK, where digital radio listeners are nearly 40 million, Norway, where there's about 6 million or so. Norway, 98% of all cars sold have got DAB Plus built into them. And you can see the sort of stats across the rest of the region, the rest of Europe particularly. Coverage here. So we've gone from 63% coverage to 65%. So that tells you how much that, let's say, Canberra and Hobart and Darwin added to the total figures and total coverage area. I find this quite interesting. Apparently 94% of road coverage, like 5,900 kilometres of Australia, is covered by it. But the little disclaimer says first level road coverage, motorways, autobahns, autostradas, and so on, and auto routes. Yeah, that's not quite the same here in Australia. So your freeways in the cities are 94% covered by this. I would like to talk to them about the Stuart Highway at some point, or pretty much any other road that doesn't go through a capital city once in a week here. But anyway, it's a nice looking graph anyway. DAB Plus household receivers we've looked at as well. Number of national stations, we're not on that list, but you can see sort of the size of some of these. So 32 national stations for Norway, Italy 49, and here we go, percentage of people listening to digital radio, and last little bit, these are the ones that they call emerging markets. So these are countries that are coming online with DAB or DAB+. Some have got regular coverage in certain places. Some have got coverage in only certain cities. Other ones, they're trialling it across the entire country and different areas. So Indonesia is actually quite a big one. There's 2 million people in and around the Jakarta area when they did this. And they've got coverage around about, Jakarta's actually larger than that. Is it 8.5 million people, I think? But they're covering about a quarter of it with their test broadcast so far. But Indonesia is a massive country and a lot of people in these fairly dense population centres. So DAB Plus radio over there could be a very, very big thing. And yes, a whole heap of other ones around the rest of the world. Okay, so let's move back over to my rough little thing. So we've talked about what DAB Plus is and how it covers a lot of different areas. Well, here in Australia, we have some fairly unique issues in that we're a very, very, very big country with people densely populated in some areas and a lot of people spread out in between. It's going to take a while for DAB Plus, if ever, to really cover all of Australia in the way that we want it to. In what we're using here and what they use throughout the world is VHF band 3. So VHF band 1 is the old ABC analog station that used to be around. 3, 4 and 5 are our FM radio, so that's 888 to 108 megahertz range that we were talking about before. And then we get to VHF band 3, band channel 5A through to 12. So this is channel 6, 7, 8, 9, 9A, 10, 11 and 12, all in this space, all in VHF 3, and there are their frequency range, the little 7 meg bands that they've all been given. Most of you are familiar with it from digital TV, and you know that our digital TV stations here in Melbourne, for example, sit in and around these 2 radio frequencies sitting in the middle of this. If I take that one little step further, this I love. In a DAB radio sense, channel 9 here equals channel 8, A, B, C, D over here. So remember, 9 equals 8. and then 9A equals 9. Does that make sense? Good. Essentially, there are up to 8 sort of blocks that we can use for digital radio in Australia. And at the moment, I think we're using 4 different ones, depending on where you are. Normally 9A, B, C, and I think 8D around Canberra as well, if I remember rightly. I'm going to take you back one step to have a look at the little antenna that's here. I haven't got this one down on the floor. I've got the Fracaro digital antenna instead. So this is a Fracaro DAB antenna. It's essentially a little VHF, 3-element antenna. Nothing particularly crazy, nothing particularly sort of unique about it, but it's designed to be mounted vertically because digital radio broadcast here in Australia is vertical. In and around most of the cities in Australia, who can tell me what polarization our normal VHF signal is sitting on? Horizontal, absolutely. So this is different. If I put one of these antennas up, which is our normal VHF, UHF combo, etc. version for it, VHF side of this can pick up digital radio. Not a problem. It can do it. It's in the right frequency band. It's in the right range. It can certainly pick it up. If it's got an LTE filter in it, who cares? The LTE is so far out of the space for this stuff that it doesn't really matter much. But I have to mount this vertically to make it make sense, which is great for DAB, hopeless for VHF. So if you've got one of these on your house already, you could buy a second one, mount it vertically underneath if you can work out a way to strap it in there properly. But will it let the water out and do all the things it's supposed to do? Well, yeah, maybe not. So we have a couple of little DAB antennas for that purpose. But if you really need to get reception in a very, very lousy area, you can buy a big VHF antenna. So a DY6, a DY13, a Big Hills multi-element antenna, providing you can mount that vertically and you have enough separation on your mast, you can potentially pick up digital radio a lot further away from a city centre or main sort of transmitter location than we're talking about. And I'll get to that in just a second as well, because there are more digital radio transmitters out there than I think most of us know. For car purposes, you've got standard AM, FM, etc. antennas have enough extension most of the time to pick up DAB plus as well, but the proper ones built into cars have just got a little bit more to make sure that they work. So internal mount antennas, external ones, huge whips like this one. There are plenty of ways to get that radio signal in there if you need to. One little note, this one was sitting in the wrong spot out the back. There's a heap of them sitting in the wrong spot, and the quantities are actually out at the moment. This is an FM antenna. Looks very, very similar to Digitech's other antenna, which is for DAB+. If it's tuned for FM, will it work properly for DAB+? Not really. It may work, but not very well. This one also has a bracket that I don't think can be moved to put this one vertically versus horizontally. So we've got a few too many FM ones and none of our little DAB ones in stock at the moment. So I'm guessing that a few of the wrong ones have been sold for the wrong thing, but just be very, very careful. I wouldn't sell an FM antenna, a FM specific antenna to do DAB+. Not without checking very carefully about how it can be mounted and the rest from there. These are obviously a very important thing for outside signal, to bring that cable in just via an F-type here, down into the house the same way as you would do for your normal antenna signal, for your TV signal. But now I've got this radio in my house, and how on earth do I get that reception from that big coax and F-type and the rest of it into this, which is the antenna for this little beastie, or more commonly, one of these. This little antenna that's here is great if you've got enough signal in the area to make it work. If this is my only digital antenna though, digital radio, I've got no inputs to be able to plug in an antenna. I can't remove this and plug something into it. So I have to couple my other bigger antenna onto this one. And this calls for the old patented hack job, which I rather like, and it works really, really well. So the antennas like this one are normally around about 300 ohms. And 300 ohm is typically what you're getting before it goes through what an antenna's actual native impedance is, if you want to think about it that way. They put it through a little balun that's on the antenna, which turns it into an F-type, which is what this little black box is here. It's just coupling these two together into an F-type connector. We have these as external components. So here is one. It's got an F-type there, through a little weatherproof grommet or seal, and it's got two cables coming out the other side. If I put that onto a little banana clip like this one, clip that onto there, and then hook that into my big antenna, I've now got reception in an area where I didn't have any before. I know it looks ugly, I know it doesn't look all that professional and the rest, but it works perfectly well. So keep that in mind if you are selling to people who are out of the area and they happen to have these sort of radios. If you were doing it though, would you recommend that they bought a radio like that if they lived in, let's say, Bendigo? Probably not. Fixed antenna like this one's probably only going to be of limited use, even with an external balun like this or like this one. So, better choice than this one is the little Wintel one. On the outset, it doesn't look like it because it's still a small little one. In fact, this doesn't have an antenna stuck in it anywhere. There's nothing built into it for digital reception at all. But what this does have, if I've got my little connection here, is a tiny little 3.5mm mono jack. And 3.5mm mono through one of these, PAL to 3.5mm, into here, and now I can put PAL to F-type up to my antenna, and I've got external DAB radio reception through this little beastie. There's 3.5mm to PAL, and there's 3.5mm to F-type versions of these adapters. So if you need to, you can use one of these to do the job. Of course, this doesn't have a speaker built into it, so it's not quite the same as this. You want to hook that into an amplifier or into powered speakers to make it work. But this one also does Bluetooth, internet radio, local network audio, and a whole heap of other things. It's kind of a universal tuner in that sense. And I will talk a little bit about streaming data versus radio, digital radio in a second. With a little one like this one, the reception that this picks up is actually via the headphones connected to it. It uses those to couple, and that's how it picks up its signal. So if you try to use, well, this one doesn't have a speaker, but some of the other ones that do will have an external antenna or a big sort of whip to make that work. This one, you have to plug in headphones that make it happen. If you've got really, really shielded and high-end headphones, you may end up picking up no reception at all. So just keep that in mind too. These ones, again, these ones with the little whips or a bit of cable in there, all you do is expose that back and hook that into your clip and then into the balun the same way as you did the others. With a radio like this one though, this one is a little bit different. So this is sneaky, which I quite like and hate Sanjin for doing. This one has got a standard whip antenna. If you pull on this, it's not going anywhere. Nothing's happening with it. But what it has is a little plastic cover that's screwed in place, and underneath that, you can kind of see there, we've got an F-type socket on the back of the radio. So from the outside, it doesn't look like it's got an external antenna socket, but it actually does. So be very, very careful. If you are selling this to somebody or buying this, you can definitely get into this and hook an external antenna directly into it. So that was something I looked at a while ago on the website for a customer who wanted one with an external socket, and I pulled the thing out of the box and went, hang on, no it doesn't, this isn't moving, this isn't unscrewing, I'm going to break something here, and then took the screws out and worked out what was going on. A bigger, higher end stereo amp like this with DAB Plus built in has got a lovely big F-type socket on the back of it. So again, for somebody who's really concerned, buy something with an external socket. It'll make your life a heck of a lot easier. All right, radios. And this one can't do anything with unless you cut open the plastic and rubber on the outside and connect something to it. But tradie radio on site, you're probably not going to do that anyway, or I hope not. All right. Jumping across to this lovely slide. So I've got a few other areas here, but I want you to look at the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections here. These are all of Melbourne's digital radio transmitter sites. The big one with the most power, it's 50,000 watts or 50 kilowatts, is obviously Mount Dandenong. In Melbourne City, we have another one, a little one, only producing 400 watts. Exactly the same frequencies, exactly the same polarization. In fact, you can see that all throughout Australia. We're using those same frequencies in general to do the job. I didn't put Canberra on here. Canberra, I think, uses 8D, which is a different frequency, but close enough that it makes no difference for what we're doing here. Port Melbourne's got a little one at 300. Bacchus Marsh and Melton's got one. Werribee's got its own out there as well. The Werribee one can sometimes be picked up in Geelong, but the Melbourne City one is generally stronger, even down towards Geelong, just because of its location. So if you're not getting reception with an external antenna in Werribee pointing at, say, Melbourne or at the main transmitters, turn it around a bit to Old Snades Road or Old Sneeds Road or whatever it is, the site that's up there, Snides, I don't know, whatever it is. Obviously, I'm a Werribee local. You point that to your local tower and you probably have enough signal to make it work. A bit the same way as our normal digital TV. Look for your local transmitter locations and you should be able to pick it up. And yes, you can pick it up outside the city areas, but again, it's the amount of signal, amplification, everything else you can put it through. In terms of amplification, anything you should consider when it comes to putting a digital booster or an amplifier onto the signal? Anything specific or anything unusual that you'd want to look at? Realistically, not much. So long as it produces VHF boost, then it'll be boosting enough for the digital radio as well. Would an FM trap do anything to the signal itself? No. Too low down, wrong frequency, shouldn't cause any problems whatsoever for it. Okay, easy enough. My general recommendation is to look for low noise digital amplifiers. So the MDA series from Kingray are a pretty good choice for that. Just less insertion loss, less digital noise means a better, cleaner signal on the output side. And for radio, that might be a weaker signal than our normal signal is. You probably want to keep that as clean as possible while you're amplifying it. And you can see, obviously, yes, different sites and different locations. Sydney has half a dozen different sites. Perth has a couple. Brisbane's got a couple. Hobart's only got one up on Mount Wellington. And you can see something a bit different here. Perth and Hobart are only producing 2 frequencies themselves. And you notice that their number of channels is down on what the other cities and other areas are doing. My guess is that they'll add more and more to those as they go along. But yeah, it's quite a useful thing to see. All right. Okay. Looking more or less, my last main point that I wanted to make here was about digital radio versus mobile data. I am, without a doubt, more of a digital mobile data listener than I am a radio listener, and I always have been. When I was in high school in Mount Gambier, there were a couple of really good community radio stations, one of which introduced me to a whole genre of music that just wasn't possible where I lived. Radio holds a special thing in my heart for it, but the quality hasn't ever really been there versus listening to a CD, listening to a high quality stream or whatever else it might go through. But I do that in the knowledge that I have to pay for the quality that I'm getting. And that can be a very, very big thing. So to a low-income family, a low-income individual, whatever else it might be, digital radio could be a very big step up in quality for 0 extra cost if they already have a digital radio in their truck, car, or whatever else it is that they're doing. Digital radio doesn't cost you anything if you've got the hardware to do it. And a lot of people will have it whether they know it or not, particularly in the cars. There's no ongoing subscriptions, there's no payment fees, there's no service that's going to get shut down because Spotify lost its rights for Australia or whatever else that might be. Digital radio is pretty solid when it comes to that. There's a very simple one-to-many structure built into radio in that I put a big radio transmitter up and I just send the signal out, and anybody can hook into that as much as they like. You know, I could have 500 radios in a small space and they'd all be able to pick up digital radio. You're not using up the signal to make it happen. With mobile data, if you've got, let's say, the MCG on game day, there's 90,000 plus people in there, plus staff, plus people in the local region, and they're all trying to use those mobile phone, those cell towers, those locations to post Instagram selfies and videos of players from 500 meters away and all that sort of stuff that happens. And so your streaming service on mobile and your experience becomes a lot worse because of it. Data is a big one for me if you think about the actual amount of data that you use for, say, Spotify. So typically Spotify is about 2 megabytes per 3-minute song, as let's say an average for that. Means about 40 meg an hour. Roughly 2 hours a day would give you 2.5 gigabytes worth of data per month. In terms of data plans, most of us are fairly nerdy that way, but I imagine most of you have got 10 or 15 gigabytes of data a month to be able to use, maybe 5 in some cases, 500 depending on who you're with. If you've got lots of data, streaming audio for a couple of hours a day, not a problem at regular quality. If you go to Spotify Extreme, which is 302 kilobits per second, lovely stuff, that's about 7.5 to 8 meg per 3-minute song. That's then 150 meg an hour. 2 hours a day turns out to be about 9 gig a month. And suddenly your 10 gig plan means you've got email and not much else left over on your mobile data. Radio doesn't do that. Turn on the radio, it's not using any data, it's not costing you a cent to make it work. So that can be a very big factor for a lot of people. Particularly things like commercial drivers too. If you're driving a truck all day, every day, you don't really want to be paying 8 hours worth of Spotify streaming worth of data every single day of the month that you're on the road. With something like digital radio or AM or FM, then you obviously don't have that issue. You've got a bit of extra information on digital radio. Limitations, you need to be within range of a major city, which is definitely true. That is growing and it will continue to, but if you drive from here to Mildura, you'll have reception until you probably hit about Gisborne, and then there'll be nothing for the next 4.5, 5 hours. With mobile data, obviously the closer you are to the local mobile phone tower, and if you're on Telstra / Optus / Vodafone, that will make a big difference on how much data and signal you get and how much sound quality you get out of it as well. Each individual service on here, I can choose my music with Spotify or one of those other services. I can't do that with digital radio. I can choose in broad sense, I want to listen to kids radio, or I want to listen to classic rock, or I want to listen to my 24-hour-a-day Christmas music channel. Yes, Elf Radio is a thing, particularly here in Melbourne, so if you really have a hankering for Christmas stuff, go for it. But radio takes a lot of that away in that you don't have to pick a track or a playlist, it just keeps going all the day for you. So, useful things to do. And my last point on that is emergency broadcast. Traditional AM radio, FM radio, and DAB radio transmitters are battery backups, generator backups, and other things like that. They're designed not to go down because they're to be relied on if something really goes wrong. And on the remote locations that these towers are in, power outages definitely happen. So they want to keep the broadcast going. It's in their station's interest to make that happen. A mobile phone tower could drop out, and if you're close enough to another one, you'll never know that it happened. If Telstra has a nationwide outage or a regional outage, then suddenly no more data for any of you for anything, but radio is still going to be able to tell you that a dust storm's on the way and you might want to stay inside. So listening to the radio and having those sort of alerts is a good backup in cases where things really, really go wrong as well. Okay, last bit on all of these things that I wanted to show you is this. We were talking about quality before, and I wanted to show you the Melbourne stations a little bit more detail. So Melbourne has 2 multiplexes, so there's 9A and 9B. A multiplex basically means a whole heap of channels jammed together. So take something like Racing Victoria here. They have 3 racing channels that they put out. So racing in the Victorian amateur football on one, more racing, and then a simulcast of 9:27 AM. So they've got 3 separate stations, and you can see the bit rates vary widely between these 3. This one just being somebody going, insert weird name horse here is going around the bend, followed by second insert weird name horse here. You probably don't need the highest quality to make that happen, so they take full advantage and drop the quality down a long, long way to make it happen. There's a couple of Christian radio stations in the middle here. This needs to be updated because Coffee doesn't exist and it's not owned by Nova anymore. Actually, is it? No, it is, because Nova owns the Smooth brand as well, so Coffee is now Smooth Relax. But what I'm interested in here is that Coffee is running at about 40 kilobits per second. And I've got a feeling from listening to it this morning that that's actually dropped when they put it over to Smooth Relax, because it's full of quite a lot of compression noise and hisses, or not hisses, but a lot of sibilance and things that I don't remember it being on the original station. So These can be adjusted by the stations as much or as little as they want to. If there was something super important that Coles Radio wanted to do and they've got the bandwidth to do it, they can up their service to 128 kilobits per second to make it sound as good as possible. You can also see here who owns each of these different systems. I think it says something like 2 in 9 of the broadcast spaces allocated are for community radio stations. So you can see a few of them up there. So classical radio stations and 3RRR here. Southern Cross all stereo, so Triple M and things like, what else we got here? Nope, don't want my search history coming up. Southern Cross over to Buddha Hits and Fox FM and Gold FM owning, I'd like these. Chemist Warehouse Remix is run by the same people that do Gold 104.3. We're looking at it earlier. The Coles radio is run by Nova Entertainment. So sort of tells you a little bit about how those stations are put together and who's being contracted out to make it happen. And yes, there are kids radio ones and all sorts of other stations all available there, and you can see their quality levels go up and down throughout it all. What I tend to look out for are the ones that are highest kilobits per second. Why Macquarie Sports Radio is using so much, I've got no idea, but it's probably the best quality audio broadcast out there for sports radio if they need to. I also don't know what hot adult contemporary actually means as far as radio stations go, but hey, that's what Kiss FM is going for, so there you go. All right, one last little thing then. I keep saying last, but I do mean it this time. This little radio here is a portable radio. Portable digital DAB radio, DAB plus radio. Got all the same features, digital tuning, station list coming up, information, all that sort of stuff for it. Would you sell this to somebody who's going to an AFL game to listen to what's going on in front of them?
No.
Definitely not. Yeah, if you don't like them, or if they're a little bit slow, perhaps, then this would be perfect for them. Anybody got a rough idea what the delay is between live action and what comes through a digital radio like this? 7 seconds. Damien's right. It's about 7 seconds on one of these things. That may be a deal breaker or not, depending on what you're doing, but it can be quite distracting to hear the crowd through your ears and then hear the crowd in your brain on one of these things. Can be a very, very distracting thing. Lip sync gone very, very, very wrong. Mostly this is down to the HEAAC V2 and the what do they call it? The error correction part of this. Error correction meaning the radio's making sure that it's got it right before it produces it in your ears. It produces less noise and less artifacts and all that other stuff like that, but you get a delay built into it. It's just the way that it is. So if you're going to listen to live sport at the moment, buy an analog radio, you're going to be a much, much happier person because of it.
You do a cross-sell to the Panasonic.
Cross-sell to the Panasonic, to the Sangean analogs, to a few others as well. Or you might have a radio that has multiple modes. Switch it to AM or FM mode and use that to pick it up instead. All right, sorry?
So the one yesterday, in case you're wondering where it went.
Which one? The
DK 45.
Oh, yes, perfect. Yeah, there are, it's easy to do. It's easy to sell, it's easy to tell people about it and how it all goes together. So I've got some more radios for you to check out up here. There are different features and different options between each of them, but my biggest thing is look for external antennas or not, depending on how far away you are. Look to spend as much or as little as you need to, depending on what you're trying to do. If you have a small commercial business, you could put a radio, an amplifier like this in. Audac also have DAB Plus modules that fit into their 4-way modular commercial components. Hook that into the data network and they're fully accessible and controllable through the same app that actually controls the multi-zone audio stuff for them. So XMP44 is the modular, and I think it's DMP40 is the little DAB Plus module that fits into it, and it has a nice little little F-type socket on the back to be able to screw into and use. Okay, and tradie radios, we sell a heap of them, but there's this and there's a higher quality version of the same thing as well for those guys who like to destroy their radios when it comes out. I have personally seen a Canon rep for Sangean a few years ago ditch one of these things across a car park at full speed and smash it into a brick wall, and it kept playing kept playing music the whole way through. Yeah, quite well made, quite solid. yeah, really, really useful.
Sangean also manufacture the Makita
Oh,
radios.
that's right, yes. So as Mike said, Sangean also manufacture Makita DAB and tough radios and things like that for them. My general feeling is that there are different tuner qualities in every single product that's out there. There are a few specific tuner modules that are better than the others, but Sangean are one of the best ones I've ever seen and experienced in all sorts of different environments. So you can generally feel pretty safe that you'll get as much signal as you possibly get with it. And if you get a component that has an external antenna like this one or this one, then the sky's the limit in terms of antennas and amplification and whatever else you might want to do to make it work. All right. Any other questions or general information that people want to ask about? Yeah, go for it.
Range, as in, well, from your guys' point of view,
Sure.
guy comes in from, say, Kinglake or whatever.
Sure.
I'm thinking, does his FM radio, ordinary FM radio work where he is?
Sure.
Does that be good enough to say, well, you've got a fair chance this will work?
Probably not, unfortunately. FM broadcasts are on a different power than these ones and a slightly lower frequency, which means they've got more bandwidth. So, they've got more lower frequency means better wavelengths for transmitting further distances. I would probably use as a more general guide your digital TV from Melbourne, for example. So channel 6, the lowest end digital TV channel, is lower than the channel 9 stuff that we're looking at over here for broadcasting. So if you're getting reception around 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, so your normal digital TV stations from here, that's a good starting point. But again, that's all horizontally polarized. We're talking a vertically polarized signal here. So there really is no substitute other than taking the basic DAB antenna out there, hooking the thing up to your normal TV meter will actually pick up these frequencies. So plug it into that and measure the levels and the readings from it when it's vertically up on your roof. It's probably the best way to be 100% sure.
Cars have often digital tuners. So
Yeah.
The only problem is cars will automatically swap across to FM, so you've got to make sure.
Yeah, so the cars have a digital radio antenna in it. In some cases, they actually use the body of your car as a ground plane for the antenna, so you're actually driving around in a giant antenna. That works better or worse in some areas than the others too. As Mike said, some cars have the ability to switch from one to the other, so it pushes you from the DAB version of the broadcast to FM if you go out of range for it. If you've got reception in your car at ground level at your customer's house, it's a pretty good chance that by the time you put an antenna up on the roof, that's going to work for you as well. All right, let me see what else I can tell you. That's probably good. Anything else from interstate or other areas where they've had issues or problems, or anything else you want to talk about? If not, then I'll send you all on your merry way, and thank you very much for listening.